hold our questions until after till the end of each presentation. The meeting minutes, you have those and I'm like to know if there's any changes, corrections, or additions, and if not, if there's a consensus to improve. So do I have any changes, corrections, additions, subtractions? No. Is there a consensus to approve? Yes, yes, yeah. There you go. Thank you. And Denise, consensus, we don't vote on that. We're just, yay. Thank you. Mr. Siegel, you're first. Will you please lead us in the internal, external stakeholders committee portion of the meeting?
I would be thrilled to. I am waiting for the arrival of a clicker so I can go through a slide deck.
Okay, we can see you now, Cameron.
Just if I have to pull up your presentation, so just
wait, the other way around. Thank you.
And can you still hear us, Cameron? Okay, thank you. David, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you for your patience, everybody. I'm sorry? Okay. The internal external stakeholders committee is going to start off with something a little bit new this time, but don't worry, I'm going to get into the old hits. So as you have noticed when you came into the building that there is a lot of excitement happening down on the first floor. We are preparing to centralize 3 different programs down there, well actually more. We are going to have the Welcome Center, the Families in Transition, and Early Childhood located down there. And we will also have security joining them. The purpose of doing so is to make the process of enrolling all of our students a lot more streamlined and customer friendly by allowing families to go to one space where they can get all of their enrollment needs is going to become much more convenient for those families. The personnel within each of these departments, within the Welcome Center and Families in Transition, are going to be trained to address all the issues that each of the departments would have handled separately. Again, providing seamless service and a more streamlined process for our families. We also are going to be bringing security down to the first floor to provide a single point of access, which is also intended to ensure a customer-friendly and easy access atmosphere. Before I move on to some of the older topics, are there any questions or comments about this particular move? Mr. Rollins.
What's the schedule? Is that all supposed to be done by school opening in the fall?
Mr. Rollins, actual construction is supposed to be, or is on track to be completed June 14th. And then we'll be transitioning Welcome Center, early childhood, and FIT down to the first floor by July 1st.
I'm
Yes,
just
Jude.
going to make mention for the board members that your FOBs initially didn't get you in down in legal or down in those places, and had a conversation with Lori, and she had Fred rekey them so that during the day you don't have to come all the way around. You come in the back door. And I've been meaning to tell you, so there you go.
Thank you. With the end of the legislative session, this part is going to be fun and possibly not real relevant and up to date, but here we go. So since the last meeting, we have scheduled a couple of meetings with our local legislators, Senator Stottleman and Representative Maurice West. We have spread the conversation from those other representatives that we have been meeting with since this committee structure was formed, to essentially share with them the same requests and same priorities that the school district has with them. We do have a meeting, which will be a second meeting, scheduled with Representative Dave Vella next Monday, and I'm looking forward to that. These have been the top 3 priorities and talking points in each of these conversations with our representatives. Given the large number of emails that came in the middle of the night, and well into the morning, and having read through some of them, it looks like some of this is actually going to change. We are going to actually be in a fairly decent looking position as far as our evidence-based funding will go, and that is very exciting. For any of our stakeholders in the district, that is very good news, including the expansion of the evidence-based funding model into early childhood, all the way up to the board level, where that evidence-based funding will help to continue hold our property taxes in line. We have also been stimulating a conversation about facilities and being able to get a prorated matching funds sort of agreement from the state. The district feels like it's important that we have local dollars committed to our facilities projects, but certainly getting some help from the state is going to, help stretch those dollars a good deal farther. And we are very rapidly approaching watching some of these federal stimulus dollars get spent, and these are the areas where the district has been focusing with our legislators on how those dollars will be spent. And this last bullet point is going to illustrate that we are getting some guidance on how those federal dollars are going to should be spent, so that we are getting some guidance from, rather than just depending on our own internal decision making. I mean, ultimately that's going to be the case, but having the guidance is definitely going to be helpful. And then moving on, I guess, are there any questions on the state discussions? Again, not a lot has happened, but yes, Mr. Rollins.
There was that one bullet point that said facilities revenue from gaming is a long way off. Is there a discussion about using some of the gaming revenue to pay for school facilities?
Yes, I think part of the holdup in funding capital has been that revenue being a little slow to roll out, but that is part of the funding is going to come from gaming.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Siegel.
Yes, Jude.
The piece about the evidence-based funding tying into early childhood, is that mean if you've got a program, they're going to increase the funding for that? If you have obviously the population to do so, which is different because right now we apply for grants?
That is correct.
And will there still be a grant?
So as the conversations have gone, it looks like evidence-based funding isn't necessarily being increased for early childhood. It's actually being brought in for the first time as a funding model for early childhood. Instead of it making it all grant-based, to actually have a steady and consistent and reasonably dependable funding stream.
Okay.
I think the bullet point is a bit of a misnomer in the sense that it appears to make it look like it's part of the funding formula. It is not directly tied into it, but there is an effort at increased funding for early childhood separate from the evidence-based funding, just to clarify. So there are new dollars for early childhood, but not tied to the evidence-based formula.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, please.
Yes, Cameron.
Yes, so can you go back to that previous slide, please? I think it was a third bullet point. Yep, that one. It says matching funds for summer programming. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what that would look like, please?
I am going to hope that Ms. Detman, who is in attendance, could come in and, no?
There are, again, to say that they are matching funds, I think what this is really about is ensuring that while federal funds flow into the district is not just taking the money it gets from evidence-based funding and having to pour it into COVID relief, but that the federal funds are being utilized properly for summer programming. So we have, we at this point are looking really good on our preliminary numbers in terms of the multitude of ways students are going to engage in summer programming. Mrs. Detman will have a full update next week in the weekly update once everything is final, but things are looking very encouraging. She's been giving us regular updates, and it looks like whether it's credit recovery, early childhood, camps, summer enrichment, all are looking really, really good, and we have a great funding source from the federal government on that, and state dollars are not being drawn away in order to fund that. The federal funds are handling it.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you, each of the chairs, by the way, when it's your committee report, and would you please field the questions, because that's your time and you have the floor. So you're in charge, and Tim, you'll be in charge of yours, and Mike, you'll be in charge of yours. Thanks.
With
I have
no
a
other,
question.
yeah.
On the mentoring and the trauma education and mentoring for teachers, what does the trauma training consist of?
Well, I'm going to answer the question honestly. At my level of conversation, we did not do a deep dive into what the actual techniques and implementation is going to be. We have content experts, although I did not anticipate that question. Therefore, I did not make sure that somebody was here to answer that.
Thank you.
Anticipating no more questions or comments, I'm going to move on to equity. There will be no new information in this portion of this and the final portion of the slide deck. This is all going to be very familiar because this is something that we have brought to every committee of the whole meeting. And we have also seen it at some of the regular board meetings presented through curriculum. What is our equity imperative? It is to create learning environments that work for all of our students and to interrupt the predictability of student outcomes based on zip code. Our equity challenge is our African-American students are furthest away from this now, and our system is not serving our African-American students well. to solve this? Who are we engaging? This is a list of the groups that we have spoken with and listened to over the course of this year. You will see that we have been discussing with students and with staff and with administrators. And this conversation has been robust. I hope and anticipate that it will grow and continue. But what has been particularly encouraging is that this conversation has circulated throughout the entire district. There have not been groups that have been excluded, nor groups that are necessarily been overemphasized, but rather it is a conversation that is circulating in through the entire system. And the purpose of these conversations is to listen to students and other stakeholders and learn about what is and isn't working. And we do have some things that are going well and some things that are not going particularly well. The point is to figure out with our stakeholders how to create a system that is going to work for all of our students. And this is what that structure looks like. We have all of these groups, from students, staff, teachers, administrators, central office, and even the board, engaged in these conversations and generating ideas to help design a better way to meet our students' needs. And this has been, targeted universalism has been one of the areas where we have focused on being able to achieve those goals, of being able to understand the needs of all of our students and provide them the opportunities to meet their education achievement goals. No, we're back. Here's where a couple of things are different. We are going to include more of our board members in this work and in these discussions. Ms. Muhammad and Ms. Pearson and Mr. Earl Dotson Jr. are going to be at a booth at the Juneteenth celebration. And I believe Ms. Pearson is going to have some comments on the work that will be done there.
Thank you. So Juneteenth is an annual event, of course, celebrating, the freedom of African Americans. And actually, Cameron kind of provoked my thoughts regarding this. And that is a couple of things that I've noticed as a school board member. Many of our community members and parents really don't know who their sub-district representative is. Now, some of that is their fault, and some of it is our fault. And I think that it is, and yes, they can go to the website and see who their representative is, but just as a conversation I had just yesterday as we were celebrating Memorial Day, I asked a parent made a statement regarding RPS 205. And so I asked her who her sub-district representative was. And I asked her which sub-district were you in? Is it, C, is it G? And she says, I don't know. And I said, one thing that I'm learning as I engage in the community, that we can't put everything on RPS 205. This has to be a shared responsibility. That being said, we also have to make sure, and we are eager to work with Earl Dotson Jr. and getting this communication out to our community members. And one of the ways the booths are being made available, and we can have information regarding the services that we provide, making sure that information in regards to who your sub-district representative is, and that is a good way to target and make sure information is getting to the African American community. So again, personally, I look forward to being engaged in the community. I think that Dr. Jarrett and Earl Dotson Jr. have made a significant personal sacrifice in making sure that our students are given an opportunity to take advantage of the Rockford University pathway, which is another bit of information that can be shared in the African American community. So in addition to that, is when there's lack of information, misinformation, then there leaves a room for people to fill in what they think it is. And I think it is our responsibility, part of our responsibility, to make sure accurate information is shared with the community. And this is a perfect opportunity. And it's not limited to African Americans. Like, every board member can show up. That would be wonderful. And knowing and engaging with the community. So that is the gist of having the booth, is to have information made available for parents and community members. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing that we have come full circle to the beginning of the presentation, it is, I guess I'll take any questions or comments that people might have. Yes, Ms. Pearson.
So, we speak a lot about equity, and I know that is a work in progress. And it will always be a question, is how will we really get the buy-in from our teachers, our school administrators in that? So the outcomes of, and where it relates to achievement, I understand, if my understanding is correct, that the school administration is responsible for the achievements. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So if there is not a direct tie between outcomes and increases, what is another way to reassure that the equity efforts will be accomplished?
That question, I think, creates the system-wide engagement. If we are going to hold the superintendent accountable for achievement, and we are going to look at achievement through an equity lens, we need to make sure that the entire system is seeing the same things the superintendent is seeing and hearing. When we can do that, then we can say, and at the board level, we're part of the conversation too. We have a way of being able to hold the superintendent accountable. We can say we heard this and this and this, and nothing seems to have changed. Now, based on hearing the conversations, I don't anticipate that's going to be how it turns out. But the reality is, with every level of the system being engaged in the conversation and with a priority on listening and learning, it is our direct path to holding the superintendent accountable for achievement, even when we're looking through an equity lens.
Thank you. And Dr. Jarrett, no doubt, is very capable of doing that. And all eyes, of course, is always on the school superintendent. But there are individuals that are part of our educational team that answers to Dr. Jarrett. And so we can't, and it's easy to do, to just, and Dr. Jarrett may be willing to be the sacrificial lamb, but we really have to hone in on people sharing this burden with Dr. Jarrett.
Absolutely, we do. And I think it's really important that our principals are engaged in this conversation. They are going to be a very important part of the conduit of information flowing up and down and making sure that accountability is going in both directions.
Does that end your report?
That ends my report. I am going to hand off to Dr. Jarrett, who I believe is going to give us a report on values.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. Connor, can you pull up the values presentation, please? While we're waiting to pull that up, I do apologize. We had a couple slides that had some dated information on Mr. Siegel's handout there. One update I do have for the group, and part of the reason it's dated is because it's a moving target. As recently as last night, the budget was still being finalized, but I can share one really positive update, which is it does appear that we are going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of $11 to $12 million impact through evidence-based funding. The state has been funded at $350 million, and that is approximately what, the last time I talked to Michelle, who's not here to give the exact number, she'd probably know it off the top of her head, but it will be in that ballpark, will be added to the FY22 budget, assuming that is officially approved. The state legislature is still in the process of finalizing that, but that is the direction things almost certainly will be heading. Still not seeing the core values presentation. Another way we could do that while we're waiting, so as not to hold the meeting up, is if you look in your agenda under 4B, there is the slides are there. There are only 8 of them, and I think that can guide you along as I go through. We have established 4 core values. Oh, here's the slide deck. And in those 4 core values, we have continuous improvement, collaboration, communication, and character. And these are ways of behaving that we increasingly have been working to make visible. Just because we say these are our core values, they don't automatically become the way we behave. So it has to really be embedded in all aspects of nearly 5,000 employees and all aspects of the HR function, everything from hiring to evaluation and everything in between. So these 4 core values continue to be a focus because it is important how we behave and that we do so in a way that high quality behavior is celebrated in terms of how we perform. In years 1 and 2, we really focused pretty heavily on the district office. That was an easier group to start with, so we focused on cabinet presentations, building visibility, and we started some work around shout outs and really tried to celebrate people that were doing things well. We also created something called the Globetrotter Award, where a different department could recognize another department for ways that the values were being lived. Those are some of the focal points for the first 2 years of the work. As we shifted into year 3, we really emphasized the need to share this with the principals who could cascade to schools. And I spent time at each principals meeting talking about one of the values, had the schools go back and share that in their respective faculty meetings and tried to emphasize each of those so we could build visibility. And we also had living the values cards that went out to schools. Moving into year 4, we really were ready to dive into our RACE plan, which is not race in that sense, but RACE stands for research and an action plan, and I forget the other 2 off the top of my head, but there are 4. Thank you, Earl. And the RACE plan is a way of being disciplined about building a communication plan. We had to kind of take a break on some of those as we went through the pandemic, but we're really ramping that up now, and we built a toolkit so that all departments and all schools can have access to those strategies. And we're really moving now into a phase where this truly is going to be something we use to differentiate performance. Making a decision about hiring should incorporate the values. Making a decision about celebrating success, evaluation, and various HR functions all can tie in. So this has been a long, slow rollout, but it's something that is increasingly becoming a part of who we are as a district, and something that I think is really important, because if you don't have clear aspirations for how individuals behave and how they perform, a vacuum will fill that in. So this has been important to us, that we are really intentional. We're really emphasizing engaging with a number of audiences. You can see paraprofessionals, nutrition services, bus drivers, all the way down the line, to reestablish some of those connections that during the pandemic, it was a little difficult to do some of the meetings and the protocols and the things that we've been doing. But you could see signage like we have in the back of the boardroom there, increasingly being spread throughout our district. And values flyers, values pins are starting to debut. So we're again trying to have fun and celebrate it. You would have seen me today out in our transportation center and also in our operations center, celebrating with a Living the Values. It's a little chocolate bar along with a note written by employees. What's powerful about that, and then Connor comes out and takes a picture, is not the gift of the chocolate bar, but the fact that I'm often reading a note of gratitude that's come from another staff member that's sharing how much he or she appreciates the work that individual has done. So we are slowly but surely celebrating this in a much more systemic way. We do that on a monthly basis, and we are certainly seeing more and more hiring and evaluation decisions based on these values as well. So with that, I'll open up the floor for any conversation around our core values.
Mr. Connor.
One question on the evaluations of the values. Can you speak to how that will be done? So when, give a for instance, in say a school for a teacher, and then somebody in, I think you already said like transportation or whatever, and how the values will actually be judged, or the criteria.
Yeah, great question. So when you see the superintendent evaluation, cabinet evaluations, principal evaluations, we started with a lot of our administrative evaluations already actually have a way to give a numerical value and also examples with a really tightly designed rubric. When you start talking about teacher evaluations, because of how explicit Danielson is, and it's basically a contractual agreement with the REA, and there's some state legislation around that as well. We have to find ways to we're doing more celebrating people for living the values at this time than actually evaluating. So depending on the group I'm talking about, and depending on how much flexibility we have based on collective bargaining, et cetera, we're at various levels of implementing this. When we eventually get there with teachers, it will be by incorporating these 4 values into Danielson. So some of those are really easy, like continuous improvement is something that can fit really nicely into some of the standards of Danielson. Character is about how a teacher is putting his or her students first. That can fit in as well. So most of these can be cross-referenced, and we just haven't done that with every evaluation instrument yet. But for example, our 41 principles, you'll see that very explicitly laid out in their evaluation.
So one follow-up on that. I'm not looking for a time-based metric yet, but is there something that essentially gives recommendations to the principals about how much time things like values should take up in their conversations, either with staff, individually or as a group?
At this point, we have not been that explicit about how much time. The most direct connection we had with principals was when we would talk about a value at the all principals meeting and then expect that they would have that as a teaching point and a point of emphasis and celebration and recognition at their subsequent internal faculty meeting for that month. So that has been that's been kind of the limit of how prescriptive we've been. But I think moving forward, we will start to see more and more conversations in the hiring process, as well as the evaluation process, as well as hopefully continuing to celebrate it at the building level.
Yeah, I think one of my comments after Mr. Siegel's report is that I would think at some point, the communication with the community and particularly parents or family would be a part of this.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things here is that communication on expectations, I think, is something that would be very helpful. And as Ms. Pearson pointed out, it's a two-way street on all this. But having expectations that these are our values, this is what you should see, I would think would be a pretty helpful step.
Absolutely. And as we dive into this year 4 and 5 race process, 5+, that is exactly what you're going to see, is that tighter connection to all those core HR functions, which will then allow this to be a much more open and explicit expectation that families, students, community can expect in terms of how we conduct ourselves.
Ms. Pearson.
Of the values listed, under which value would you connect equity with?
I'm glad you asked that question. In fact, those who interviewed for our most recent cabinet position, that was one of the 5 questions, because we're in the process of doing that work, and I wanted to hear how that happened. And I think the answer is all of them. We had over 10 interviews last week, and every single one of the values came up. I, like Mr. Dotson Jr., am partial to character because I think it's about putting students first, but there were incredibly powerful cases made for continuous improvement, collaboration, and communication. I think continuous improvement is another really nice fit because equity is a journey. It's not something that you finish. It's something that we're constantly getting better at. So those are 2 really strong connections, but instead of having equity as a standalone value, we truly believe it is embedded in all 4.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments about the values presentation?
Seeing none, thank you for your report. Mr. Connor will now lead the Performance and Monitoring Committee portion of the meeting. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Since I'm never sure if board comments are going to actually occur, let me just say that yesterday was Memorial Day, and as I do at Memorial Day, the 4th of July, and Veterans Day, I have my flag tie on, and because it is Memorial Day, and we always want to thank our service members, but it's really about those that sacrifice themselves for all of us. So I just wanted to say that, you know, it is a sacred day, and really we can never forget those that that gave their life for this country. And on a personal note, I know the TV stations didn't cover it, but Cherry Valley now has a permanent memorial. As you come into town on the east side, there's all the service flags and the U.S. flag there. So just thought I'd give our little town a shout out on that. Okay, in terms of the Performance and Monitoring Committee, we have 5 board policies that have been updated. We'll preview each of them with a summary of the changes. A is board policy 2.172, use of consultants. This policy is updated to align with revisions to board policy 4.60, operations, purchases, and contracts. Specifically, only consultant contracts over $25,000 now need prior board approval if not included in the budget attachment. And please make sure that you're drinking your caffeine as I go through all this. So just thought I would confess that one up front. B is board policy 5.90, general personnel, abused and neglected child reporting revisions. State that any district employee who has willfully or negligently failed to report an instance of suspected child abuse or neglect may be dismissed. 105 ILCS 510 through 23.12C and 5/21B-75B. Those are laws. If you like your alphabet soup, man, you gotta love that. Also, if a district employee reports an alleged incident of sexual abuse to DCFS and DCFS accepts the report for investigation, DCFS will refer the matter to the local Children's Advocacy Center, the CAC, and the district will coordinate with the CAC. And that's 105 ILCS 5/22-85. C is Board Policy 5.100, General Personnel. The Staff Development Program, Title IX Training and Abuse and Neglected Child Reporting Act training requirements are updated. 34 CFR, what looks to me like an ampersand. I know I'm messing this up for those of you that are lawyers, so please don't laugh too much at me. 106.45B13, 325 ILCS 5/4J. D, Board Policy 5.150, General Personnel Records. Board policy must reflect state and federal law. And last, E, Board Policy 5.120, General Personnel, Employee Ethics, Conduct, and Conflict of Interest. Revisions indicate requests for access to personnel information are governed by Board Policy 2.250, access to district public records, and there's a reference to the law 5 ILCS 140. And after that exciting rendition, are there any comments or questions? Mr. Rollins.
Back on the first one, policy 2.172, what is the budget attachment? It's capitalized, but it's not defined.
I'll let Ms. Detman answer that.
The budget attachment is the list of contracts that were included in each department's budget when we presented the draft to you coming forward. You then did a tentative approval, and that is, it yielded about a 5-6 page document of contracts that are approved moving forward for next year. Did that answer the question?
I guess. I'm not sure I knew that's what we were doing. So when the departments did their budget presentations, they listed specific contracts.
Yes.
So that you're considering to be a process of approval by the board of those contracts?
You need to speak in the microphone.
Oh, sorry. If I understand what you just said, so when the departments did their budget presentations, they did include, and I do recall this, lists of contracts. And so you're considering that to have been, that process of been obtaining board approval of those contracts, each of those contracts?
Yes. So, for example, with legal, we use Westlaw or LexisNexis each year. So we included that as one of the attachments when we did the budget presentation. Another example would be for the special education department. They use Sunbelt and Vocal Vision for speech language pathologists, for the past few years. So they included those as attachments to their budget attachment.
So Tim, I asked the same question about 2 meetings ago because I was like, what? Why aren't we voting on that? And you don't have to vote on it because you already voted on it because you voted to approve the budget. So if this is not, I don't know where we started doing this, but I was told we agreed to do this. So if we need to have a further conversation as a board, but that is the process right now. We're not going to see a bunch of.
I can't say that was ever my understanding. I don't recall ever discussing that. And so the question is whether we really pay really close enough attention as part of those budget presentations whether that should be considered to be approval. I guess if it's submitted as part of the budget, anybody can pull it as part of the budget discussion. I guess personally, I want to think about that a little bit more. But I will say that since we're using this as a capitalized term, but we're not defining it, can we find some way to define that in case the question comes up in future years, or is it defined in a different policy?
It may be defined in a different policy. I can look in the contracts policy and confirm for you, and I'll get back to you and share with the remainder of the board.
Just as a quick note, Ms. Sather reminded me that in April, when you voted on the resolution for the advanced spending, the budget attachment was that document that was attached during that vote. So if you're looking back for, capital B, capital A budget attachment, that's where it is located.
What did we vote? What did we vote on?
The resolution for advanced spending.
All right, so it was
that's where that
attached to the
came from.
resolution for
Correct.
advanced spending.
Correct. I think this might require follow-up, perhaps from Ms. Yar. I just wanted to share what I knew about the budget attachment.
All right. And then the other piece of this, Mr. Connor, you said this was to make it in sort of in coordination with an existing policy. Does that existing policy have the $25,000 limit in it? Yes?
It does, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's 4.60, purchases and contracts.
All right, thanks.
Is there anything else? Okay, this will
Yes,
come
I
up.
have a question.
I'm sorry. Oh,
Sorry, can you hear me?
yep, Ms. Mohammed.
Yep. Okay, so on, I think it's 5C, board policy 5.1, where it talks about the staff development program. So when I review it, I see that it mentions that the program, at a minimum, will have once every 2 years the training opportunities. And when you look at like the different numbers, it specifies that, like, for example, within the first 3 months of employment, staff are going to go through mandated reporter training for the abuse and neglect, the abused and neglected child reporting, excuse me. And then I see also that there's mention of, on number 12, training for school personnel to develop cultural competency, including understanding and reducing implicit racial bias. That seems a bit broad. So I know that I've asked in previous meetings if the opportunities that we give for this particular topic is mandated, and I was told that it's not. So I'm just curious, is there a way that we can look at that? Is like being more specific in terms of when those training opportunities regarding cultural competency will be taking place within the district?
Yeah, Ms. Muhammad, the ones you're referencing are mandated by the state. So for certified personnel, so that cultural competency was added to school code 3 years ago. So that's part of what is mandated each year for employees through our public school works platform, where they watch videos and have to answer questions. And so that we're able to track who has taken those. So those do not reflect the trainings that would be offered by the district through different parts of our equity work or other cultural competency work. So those are two same topic, but two different kind of lanes. One that's very broad and mandated by the state, and then more specific RPS training, which is typically developed by RPS staff in conjunction with our partners as we work with specific topics around equity that deal with RPS.
Okay, so you're saying that this is separate from the additional training that
is
you've
correct.
been doing through the national equity?
That is correct, yep.
Okay, so this is still every year though?
Yes, that is something that is taken every year in our platform.
Okay, all right, thank you for the clarity.
Okay, Ms. Pearson.
So information that is previously presented and we vote on, and the subject matter comes up again, and it's challenging with the correlation because it's kind of like past information and then the subject come up, but there's no document associated with it, and it's challenging to balance information. And if we're piggybacking on things to vote on that further complicate clarity and understanding of what is at hand. Do you understand?
I think if I have a sense of what you're saying is, the question is, and actually I've had similar questions, is when you have a topic, and I'll say in this case, if we had voted on something prior on those budget amendments and, you know, that's something that is specific to an area, I think one of the things, and maybe this is, you know, really for all the board members, but I mean, certainly part of the onboarding is some of these things are hard to correlate. I mean, I would be the first to say, you know, that's why these questions are really good. What I'm not sure of, and maybe, I don't know if Dr. Jarrett or Mrs. Dedman or, you know, Mr. Zedek or whomever might want to speak to this a little is, you know, are there proactive steps we can take, or is this just one of those things that we're going to deal with as we get questions?
Well, I think this is an excellent point. When there's a previous document reference, I think if I'm understanding you correctly, and you don't have access to that previous document, nor do any of the board members. And in fact, you weren't even necessarily, for example, Ms. Mohammed wasn't even a member of the board when that document was referenced as an example. So what I think we can do in our typical board meeting structure, we always close with a concluding event where there's board member requests. We don't have that on the committee of the whole agenda right now, but I'd be happy to take that down. And if during the course of the committee of the whole meeting or a regular board meeting, if there are documents that come up that you'd like to refer to, be able to refer to, we'd be happy to help track those down for you and send them out first thing the next morning or even that evening if possible.
Okay, thank you.
So I think the document you'd be requesting is the one that Sather referenced, the budget.
It's attached to the April 13th meeting. That's when we voted on it.
Yeah. So,
okay, thank you.
Mrs. Fromm, if you would take note of that and then send that out to the entire board.
Yes, and Ms. Mohammed, you do have access to all the documents, but I'll send that out specifically.
When there's a specific request, I would just suggest that we will to make it easier for the board members, we'll send that out when it's requested. When there's a document from a previous meeting referred to, that's probably a step we'd be happy to take.
Mrs. McCullough, you have your light on. Did you have something?
Well, I was going to say, as long as we're doing takeaways on that particular conversation, we'll also see about having Ms. Yar come and at least let's all be on the same page as to what contracts, thank you, what contracts we'll be seeing come through separately and what we're going to be voting on in these large chunks as part of the whole budget. So just more clarity for everybody, because thank you, Tim, you made me feel better because I was a little lost too, but I think we could all use a refresher. Thank you.
No, these are very good questions. Thank you all. Is there anything else? Okay, this will come back at the June 8th board meeting for a vote. The next item is the system-wide framework. As part of our June series on the system-wide framework for improvement, Ms. Dedman will provide an update on what principals and teachers have said in the month of May and how the administration will use this feedback to continue improving the draft. Do you need this?
No presentation tonight. I'm just going to give a verbal update, a progress check, kind of a summary of what we've heard this month and then where we're going next. You'll hear from me 2 more times this month yet, and you'll have supporting slides in those presentations. So first, just a progress check. What have we accomplished in the last few weeks? Last week, we completed focus group number 5 with our principals. Our focus was on hearing what school quality means to our principals, how that compares with district quality. And then we asked some questions around, what kind of information do they need as school leaders in order to get a really good understanding of the climate and culture in their school? We also completed a series of 11 Zoom meetings with small groups of principals who are not in our principal focus group. So this was the remainder of all of our principals, and this was a 60-minute opportunity to learn about all components of the framework, a little bit of time for Q&A. They also completed a Google form at the end that kind of gave me a check for kind of understanding for all of our principals, and we'll be following that up with next steps in June, which I'll preview at the end of my update tonight. We also completed teacher focus group number 4, also focused on quality. We really zoomed in on the idea of student belonging. And we have scheduled teacher focus group number 5. That'll be coming up in the coming week. We also launched the Cabinet Standards of Practice Alignment. Those drafts are due on Friday of this week. We'll be reviewing them as a team at Monday's Cabinet. So what have we heard? We've asked a series of questions, both about the standards of service and about the quality component of the system. And I'm just going to provide you with kind of a high-level overview of what we've heard. As a reminder, every time we have a focus group, we collect that data, we then pause, sleep on it, read that data again, and then draw key insights from what we've heard. What we've heard in terms of standards of service, we asked our teachers, what are you hoping to see in the standards of service from the central office? A really strong theme emerged with about 6 to 7 responses, was a strong leaning on job-embedded professional development tightly aligned to the standards of practice. So whether that be multi-tiered systems of support, reading horizons, units of study, that was a strong theme over and over again. Many also said we need more than just professional development. We need in-building support. We need to see central office folks in our schools regularly supporting us. One thing that I thought was particularly poignant was a teacher who said, we are still building relationships in this district across all positions, and this takes time, patience, and lots of listening, which is exactly what is happening here in our focus group. So that was a win. From our principals, we had a 2-hour listening session with them, and we asked a really simple question, which was, in order for you to relentlessly execute the standards of practice, what do you need from us? What do you need from the central office? And here are just a few of the themes that we heard. A reiterated theme of having access to quick and accurate data. We recognize many shortcomings in our data system, and now that we're creating these standards of practice, we need to ensure that we have quick, timely, reliable access to data for all users in our system. So underneath this work, we've started another work stream, a strong partnership between our accountability team and our IS team, examining each metric and how we collect that data and then display that data. That work will continue throughout the summer, weekly. Having district office staff and not just school supervisors in the buildings on a regular basis is necessary. And you can see we took that feedback quite seriously. Last time I was here, I showed you a proposal for sort of cycles of inquiry in schools where we're wrapping around the school principal and really asking questions about their data and observations and turning school improvement into a team sport. We also have reiterated concerns that we ensure that there are space for schools to support their own individual needs and that we don't sacrifice differentiation for conformity across the system. That's been an ongoing theme. Like teachers, we heard strong needs for professional development, fostering relationships and culture, ensuring that folks are feeling heard in our listening sessions, and needing flexibility for operational support too. There was also a strong theme in ensuring that as a central office, we are holding ourselves accountable for breaking down our own silos here in this building and creating transparency, not only from the central office to the schools, but from department to department in the central office. And at that point in time, they wanted to reiterate that they hadn't seen a concept for mutual accountability. And so in that space between collecting this data and sharing the presentation with you last week, we built the structure of the survey twice a year. In our focus group on quality system, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up 1 second. So tomorrow morning, our cabinet members will be receiving a summary of all the feedback that we've compiled over the last 3 weeks or so from our teachers and principals, so that as they finalize their drafts for their standards of practice, they'll have all of that in front of them to compare their thoughts to. And then we'll be pulling in small groups in the month of June to review those standards of service. As it relates to the quality system, we have a few important emerging ideas. The first come from our group of teachers, and there's a couple that I'm going to read out loud. We really asked our teachers in the focus group. It took us a long time to plan for this focus group because we started kind of toying with the idea of asking this group of teachers, what do you need in a quality system, and talking about just overall district systems. And we had a hard time formulating those questions. And when we pulled back and challenged ourselves on why we were having a hard time planning for this group, it was because we were talking language that isn't teacher language. So we really stripped it down and said, we're starting with the operational belief that the greatest indicator of a quality of a school is the relationship between the teacher and the students. So let's talk about that. And tell us your stories about that. How do you know that you've created a sense of community, that students have a sense of belonging in your room? How do you know if they don't have a sense of belonging? Should we know that information? What would it look like if we did? So that's where we spent our 60 minutes and had a really wonderful conversation. Here are some of the takeaways from that conversation. A few of them I'm going to read verbatim. Teachers can see and feel a sense of belonging in individual children when the sense of community is intentionally created to help all children see each other and feel seen as an individual. When the chance to make friends is absent, or when a child feels self-conscious or simply not seen in the classroom, curriculum, or learning materials, then you can visibly see the frustration and hurt in a child. Students show that they are becoming a community when they start to take ownership of the classroom procedures and environment. Importantly, when students use their voice in the classroom to talk to each other during lessons, they create a student-focused energy in the room. There may be value in thinking about how to increase student ownership outside of just one individual class and bring their voice to decisions made about the school. So I was pleased with us really pulling back and talking about that important epicenter between the teacher and students. This feedback is going to help us then generate what happens, what questions do we ask in the inquiry cycles? What would it look like to have a better pulse on this type of culture in a school? And how can we really beef up our quality system to help us better understand some of these critical things that our teachers see and experience? On the opposite end of that, we also had feedback about what's at stake when our systems are not clear. And that when our systems are not clear, it becomes like one individual adult's responsibility to find the missing support for an individual child rather than having a system of support for all children. So we reiterated the importance of a multi-tiered system of support, not just that it exists in a manual, but that it lives in the school, and that everyone is clear on where tier 1 begins and ends, tiers 2 and 3, and who in the school is responsible for each of the children in those tiers. And then finally, in our secondary schools especially, we had a really great conversation about how hard it can sometimes be to really gauge a student's sense of belonging, because you have to have some trust and a relationship in order to have such open dialogue with teenagers. So we had a really productive conversation with both elementary and secondary teachers, different conversations in each level, but they were incredibly informative and have allowed us to go back now to our concept that we shared with you last week and prep for another focus group tomorrow. From our principals, we heard that on the topic of quality, school quality, that networks for learning and improvement are important for building the skill in school leaders and making actionable steps for improvement, that they have to have the time and it has to be a priority, because if it isn't scheduled into their work and into their work day, they lose that time for thoughtful reflection and to pause and really take stock of the culture in their school. And then just the acknowledgement that surveys are great, but they don't capture everything. So we need to have multiple ways to engage voices of all in our schools. The principal is, feedback is kind of pending final synthesis. We ran out of time today, so that is hot off the press. Coming up next, we have a few tasks in the next couple of weeks. First, we've heard in our small group Zoom sessions from our principals that they have a lot of goals and they have a lot of action plans. And in order for this to become not one more thing, we need to really do some streamlining. So we'll have some small groups kind of inventorying all of the various goals and action plans that principals are asked to create so that we can begin that alignment, and then a seasonality of goal setting. That's been a specific ask of our principals. It was reiterated in, I think, 10 out of 11 Zooms over the last 2 weeks. Secondly, we'll have small group workshops around the draft standards of service. So our central office departments will have a start, they'll have a draft, and then we'll be inviting groups of principals in to react, respond, and provide guidance for revision. We are also, in the next couple of weeks, going to be testing data collection procedures in schools. We're finalizing a few details there, and then we'll be out in classrooms. We will also be, in the next couple of weeks, partnering to form small group parent and community feedback sessions. And then modifying the school scorecard for the 2021-2022 school year. And you'll hear about those updates at next week's board meeting. So that's where we've been, what we've heard in the last couple of weeks, and then where we're going. And you'll have a more formal presentation next Tuesday. Does anyone have any questions?
Mr. Siegel.
Maybe you'll hit this next week, but what are the data that teachers are looking for from central office? And you had mentioned that as info that teachers need from school leaders.
Yeah, it depends on, well, everything from assessment data to the ability to disaggregate data in multiple ways for their own needs. Having a streamlined look at dashboards rather than going to multiple platforms to try and pull reports together. So we're really asking people right now, what are the various data elements? How do we upload them? Where should we be finding them? And trying to streamline that as much as possible.
Okay. You had also mentioned that somebody made the comment, don't sacrifice differentiation. And differentiation at what level?
This is really about schools knowing the unique needs of their students and their families and being able to really have an opportunity to tell the story of their school around their data and partnering with central office departments to know what those supports should be and what schools really need. And then it might not be the same from school A to school B to school C.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Detman will return on June the 8th to preview the administration's recommended revisions to the school scorecard for the 2021-22 school year. Thank you. Last is the preview of consent items. And if you haven't already, I would highly recommend that you click on the 2 line items under 5G. And in preview of coming attractions, I think one of the goals of this committee is to run out of single-digit letters, so we have to go to double digits. Okay, so we're not there yet. We were only 3 short this time. I'm hoping the fact that it's June and we're preparing for the start of school is a big part of it, but on the consent agenda is quite a list. It's A through W. So if you want to look right now and have questions, one of the ones that stood out for me was Q, which is the Park District Facility Rental Fee Waiver. So I've asked Mr. Phillips if he would just comment briefly.
Yeah, so the Park District is asking for a fee waiver for the use of Lewis Lemon this summer from June through August. They are going to be offering some summer programming that is part of the Live, Learn, and Play initiative that Miss Detman was a part of and had presented to the board earlier in the spring. The Park District has held summer programming at Lewis Lemon for several years. Obviously last year because of COVID they did not. They're going to be serving approximately 50 students ages 5 through 12, and approximately 90% of those students will be RPS students.
Okay, I don't know if you've had a chance to look, but one of the recommendations I have for the board is because when these are brought back, I think it's always helpful if you have questions in advance, and I know there's a lot of detail here, so rather than try to go through that if you don't have prior questions, I would say one of the suggestions is that you mark certain things. Mr. Rollins.
Yeah, on the Marshall parking lot, does that mean it's actually going to be fixed?
Yes, actually, and this is the parking lot between the middle school and the elementary school. That's addressing the entire parking lot.
And that's addressing the water issues?
And the drainage, more importantly, yes.
Okay, any other questions on June the 8th? All right, if you'll take a minute and go over to June the 22nd, I know it's terribly disappointing that the list is so much shorter, but nothing really jumped out at me on these, but I thought that just give you 1 minute to take a peek, and if there were any questions or comments. Mrs. McCulloch.
Mine was actually on the previous one. I noticed the snow removal on there, and I didn't read any supporting documents, but did we divide that up like we've been dividing other things up?
Yes. The snow removal is in blocks.
Okay. Is that how we're doing our landscape? And
the same with mowing.
Same.
Mowing and snow removal are both in blocks, yes.
Okay. Thank you, thank you.
Okay. One quick comment on that one. Ms. Phillips and I have talked repeatedly about the notion, and we've talked for years off and on about the fact that snow removal and lawn care and, there's a number of topics where we really, in a sense, have joint ownership of some of the properties with not just the Park District, but the city or the county. And one of the things that I've challenged Mr. Phillips on is to, and he's really started to make some good progress on this, is where we can pool resources to save money and see what cooperation we can do. And there have been a couple of things this year, but I just would, Mrs. McCulloch's question was a really good one, and I just wanted to comment that that is something that we are looking at as a way to save money and effort going forward. Okay, are there any more questions or comments? Oh, Mrs. McCulloch.
On the district rental, since that's part of the Live, Learn, Play program, we'll have teachers that are there as well to work with students, is that correct? I thought we were embedding teachers in all those.
Ms. McCulloch, I can ask the Park District and get back to you on that. I'm not sure for this specific programming.
Okay. And then I'd also just like to comment that there are other contracts in here we'll be voting on, which obviously them weren't part of the big package that we did. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at for the conversation, is the differentiation between the two, because, the IHSAs are recurring, and as well as some of the others. So thank you.
Yep. And yes, Ms. Pearson.
I just need clarity in regards to the rental for Lewis Lemon. So would that be, if we don't charge them this year, will some of the money that we have for COVID go towards that? How would that work?
The Park District has historically provided programming at Lewis Lemon. It goes back to when Lewis Lemon was built on an old park site. And so I think there's some extra history there. So we can provide some additional detail on the history of that agreement. But we don't incur a cost per se. It's that we waive our rental fee of this facility. And board policy allows us to do that, although we are getting approval when it serves RPS students.
Okay, but so it'd be a part of our expense then?
The
Because we have
expense,
to pay for the operation?
yeah, the expense would be for, I suppose, if there's extra air conditioning that gets run or any extra wear and tear on the building.
Thank you.
Okay, these items will come back on the 8th and the 22nd, and I believe that's everything I've got.
Thank you. And you guys are ahead. Look at this. And we even started late. So go, Mr. Rollins, see if you can.
Well,
keep it
mine
up.
should be pretty quick. I've only got two really process things to talk about. First one, I don't like using acronyms, but they've broken me on this one. So ARPESSER, that's what we're going to call it, because I have no idea what that stands for, and I'll never remember it no matter how many times I'm told. So that's the federal statute that's giving us a lot of money to try to make up for some of the loss of learning as a result of COVID. And in order to do that, one of the requirements is that we have a public hearing on the safe return to in-person instruction and how we plan on using those ARP-ESSER funds. So the administration is proposing, and this will be before us for approval, this proposal will be before us for approval at the June 8th board meeting. They're proposing to advertise the hearing in the Register Star on or before June 10th, and then to conduct that public hearing at our June 22nd, 2021 board meeting. Are there any questions about that? Seeing none, I'll move on to the second item, which is the resolution and notice of public hearing on the tentative budget. So we are required also to have a hearing on our budget every year, a public hearing. We usually have that immediately before the regularly scheduled board meeting, but starting at the same time, obviously. And so they are proposing to, again, this will be before us for approval, the June 8th, 2021 board meeting, but to have the notice published in the Rockford Register Star on or before July 16th for a public hearing at the August 24th, 2021 board meeting. Are there any questions about that? Seeing none, that leads me to the preview of consent items, which is easy because there are no consent items for this committee for the June 8th, June 22nd, or July 13th board agenda. And that completes the report of the Planning and Development Committee.
Can I ask, so what are you guys doing? I'm running out of letters, and I mean, come on, you're not even using any.
I think Ms. Yar is preparing to retire.
No, come on.
All right. Well, I was going to tell you actually had extra time as well. Very efficient. Thank you so much. We'll now present items. I will present items for the Governance Committee. There's two. One is the draft of the schedule, the dates for this committee of the whole, excuse me. And it's basically the first Tuesday of every month at 5:30, except July, and July has been canceled. In July, we will only have one meeting, and it'll be a full board meeting that second Tuesday. So, but we're not looking at that schedule right now. This is just for the committee of the whole. So the second item on there, excuse me, is an addendum to, or amendment to Dr. Jarrett's contract. And if you've been listening to some of the conversation during our presentations about Dr. Jarrett's goals these are the 2024 goals, there's been a little bit of, is it percentage, is it rate, about the numbers. So for example, the annual report progress to increase the district graduation rate and freshman on track rate to 75% by 2024. That's the straight number. But on the other, build a middle school on-track tool for grades 6, 7, and 8 to establish a baseline rate for each grade level and demonstrate annual progress toward an increase of 5 percentage points by 2024. Previously, it said 5%, and in the conversation with the board, it was agreed on that it would be percentage points because they could be two, different numbers. So the same thing for the third grade literacy, instead of being an annual progress toward 5% improvement by 2024, this amends it to say 5 percentage points. So that lays that conversation to rest whenever we're having those. Do you have questions about that? And Dr. Jarrett said that we just all missed it when that contract came to us, because this was Amendment A, and we missed the word points. So now they're there. Are we good? Any questions on that? Okay, so those are the two items from the Governance Committee that are going to be coming forward, along with all the regular consent items that we have. Sorry. Let's see. We don't have any speakers, correct? We have the couple of items that will be coming back to the board. I know Ms. Fromm already sent you the April 13th link. You also will hear from Ms. Yar or somebody in that department to talk about the two different ways that we're seeing contracts coming forward.
I already followed up with that email.
And then, did anybody else have anything to bring to this committee? Even though it's not on there, I mean, we can take that and give it to administration for follow-up. No other follow-up? Okay. No further comments or agenda recommendations. I'll take a motion in a second to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, signify by aye. All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 6:59. Thank you, and thank you to everybody for getting the technology to go.